Good morning, and welcome to another lesson by Professor Choi. This is the kind of chapter that, by the way, you should be watching after you watch Supply and Demand. It will make more sense. All right, so in this particular chapter, we're basically going to do a follow-up on the model of supply and demand and basically explain what happens when the government decides to intervene in the market. Now, when the government intervenes in the market, they could do it by establishing price ceilings, price floors, quotas. They can do tariffs. The government can also do taxes. I like to focus usually on just explaining price ceilings and price floors, consumer and producer surplus, and also taxation. So first, let's talk about what a price ceiling is. So a price ceiling is basically a legally determined maximum price. And normally when you create a price ceiling, you end up with what we call a shortage. Let's try to illustrate that. So we're going to start with our basic supply and demand model. Again, we're going to put prices on this side. Remember, we use letter P for that. I'm going to use quantity on this side. We use the letter Q for that. Then we're going to put supply here. We use the letter S for that, capital S. And we put demand here, capital D. All right, so to illustrate a price ceiling better, let's be specific. Let's say that this is the market for food. Okay. Now, uninhibited, one of the things that we were explaining about supply and demand is that uninhibited, if the government doesn't touch it, what's going to end up happening is prices are going to settle at equilibrium and quantities are going to settle at equilibrium. So if nobody touches the market, a free market would end up at equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity. All right, now imagine though that equilibrium is a bit too high. So let's say that let's talk about bread, be more specific. So let's say that the price of bread has gotten so high that now to buy bread, each one that you buy is $10 each. All right? So the equilibrium price of bread has gotten so high that it's outrageous. And the government shows up and says, oh, no. That's way too high. We need to intervene. Now, let's say that they intervene by doing what we call a price ceiling. Now, a price ceiling is something that you normally use if you want to lower prices. So it's the same thing as the government showing up and saying, I don't want the price of bread to be all the way up here. I want the price of bread to be down here. So I'm going to put a ceiling on it, and that's the highest the price can go. So the government then basically comes and establishes a market price for the price of bread. And let's say that they lower it down to 5. So they cut it price in half. All right. Now, because of this price ceiling and because it's a mandate, this becomes the new price of bread. So this becomes the price of bread in the market at the ceiling. Now, people might be thinking, well, what's wrong with that? You know, if it was too expensive, let's make it cheaper. Well, what's wrong with that is that now our equilibrium is no longer the one dictating the price. It's now this price. And as a consequence of that, we're not going to have the same quantity supply as we have quantity demanded. Notice that because the price is cheaper, quantity demanded would rise. So this will be our new quantity demanded. And because the price is lower, producers are not going to want to produce it the same way they did before. So now the quantity supply is going to decline. So this is our quantity supply, and all the way out here is our quantity demanded. Because the quantity demanded exceeds the quantity supply, you're going to be under a condition of a shortage. So this is a shortage condition. Now, what does a shortage mean? Well, what it basically means is that there's going to be more people looking for bread than there is bread available. And because of the ceiling, what we're going to have is actually a decline in the production of bread. So before the ceiling, the complaint would have been it's too expensive. After the ceiling, the complaint will be I can't find any bread because the production has declined. Now, what are some of the things that normally follow after you end up with a ceiling? So the immediate thing that follows after a shortage is we start having illegal markets pop up everywhere. Now, the reason illegal markets are popping up is because it's obvious if you can find the bread, what you're basically going to do is you're going to go ahead and buy it. And then you're going to try to sell it for somebody else at a higher price. Because there's a mismatch between what people are willing to pay and what people are actually paying. So if you can find somebody who can sell you bread, you're going to try to buy it at 5, and then you're going to try to sell it at 10 in the market. The next thing that happened is because companies start figuring out that people are doing this, companies start rationing the product. So companies start saying, oh no, you can only take this much bread. No, you can only take this much. You can only spend this much per household. Things of that sort. And that is usually a consequence of a price ceiling. All right. So again, that explains the problem of price ceilings. Let's talk about another thing the government can do to change prices. It's what we call a price floor. Actually, I was thinking before we move on, let's talk about how do we fix this problem without having to impose a ceiling. All right. Now remember, the problem that we started with in this particular slide is the fact that prices for bread were too high. So we want the price of bread to go down. So a question you may ask yourself is, what can we do? Well, there are two basic things you could do in order to fix that problem. First thing you could do is you could try to figure out how to decrease demand for bread. When you decrease demand for bread, the price of bread will decline. All right. Now, what you need to do to figure this out is you go back to the list on supply and demand of things that make the line shift to the right or to the left. And then you look for something that will make the demand shift to the left. And that would solve the problem. All right. Another thing that would solve the problem, that will make the price go down, is to figure out how to make supply shift to the right. For example, you could think of a way to create more bread makers. So think about a way in which the government can say encourage new businesses that make bread to come to the market. Increasing the number of people that produce bread, prices drop. All right. So anyway, that's out with the price ceiling. Let's go ahead and talk about the next one, price floor. All right, so a price floor is the lowest price allowed by law. And price floors are usually used to make prices stay high. All right, so set up our graph, we put quantity there, price, got our supply, got our demand line. And we have right now, again, uninhibited, the market would basically go to equilibrium. So market will charge you equilibrium quantity and equilibrium price. All right, so let's talk about a specific price floor. So let's say that this is a market for labor. All right, now what exactly is a labor market? Well, the labor market is a market where you buy and sell workers for your company. So the labor market is the one where you hire or fire workers. Now, in order to kind of talk about the labor market, we need to kind of change what are the things on the sides here. So in the labor market, we don't pay people a price. That's not what we call what you get paid when you go to work. We call it a wage. So we'll be using wage here. Now, we will no longer be looking for equilibrium prices. We will be looking for equilibrium wages. So we got our equilibrium wage. All right. The quantity is still going to be quantity, but in this case, it's going to be a quantity of labor units that you hire. So this becomes quantity of labor, amount of people that you can hire to work. All right, now supply is going to be provided by those workers that want to work. So supply is going to be provided by those workers, and then demand is going to be provided by the businesses that want to hire those workers or the government that can also hire people. So demand is now either businesses or the government, and then the workers is the one on the supply side. And now we have a labor market. All right, now what happens on the labor market? Well, on the labor market, we have something in a lot of places that's called the minimum wage. And the minimum wage is a change in equilibrium. So let's say that equilibrium wages have gotten so low that they are now $5 an hour. By the way, this might be too much information, but when I came to this country, minimum wages were $4.25 an hour. In any case, imagine that they have gone down to $5 an hour, and right now in the year 2020, that is unacceptable. So let's say the minimum wage is something higher. So government passes a law and says, oh, no, $5 an hour is too low. Let's make it higher. And we're going to make it higher by dictate. So we're going to make the wage in the market equal to, say, $9 an hour. And that now becomes market wage or minimum wage. Wage in the market. All right, just like when we were doing a price ceiling. The problem with the price floor is that it doesn't take into account equilibrium forces. So as a consequence of the price floor, because it's higher, there's going to be more people willing and able to work at that wage. So the quantity supplied of people is going to increase. Now at that particular wage, the quantity demanded for people, in other words, the amount that businesses are willing and able to hire, is going to be lower than before because the wage is higher. So the quantity demanded of labor is going to decline, while the quantity supply of labor is going to increase. And that creates a condition of a surplus. Quantity supply exceeds the quantity demanded because the price that we have right now is above equilibrium, and therefore there is a surplus of labor. All right. Anybody want to take a wild guess at what do we call a surplus of labor? Yep, you guessed it. Surplus of labor is called unemployment. So unemployment is something that is a sort of side effect of minimum wages. Now, we're not saying here, using this argument, that unemployment is only created because of minimum wages. But definitely minimum wages is a contributor to unemployment. In other words, because the minimum wage is higher than equilibrium, it creates a permanent surplus where there's not enough businesses that want to hire the people because the wages are too high, because the government is restricting the amount of wages. Good so far? All right. Now, just like before, once we understood the side effect of something like a minimum wage law, which again, this is a sort of proxy for a price floor. So this is the same as a price floor. In this case, we're talking about a wage floor. All right. So this is the same as a price floor. Now let's talk about how to solve the problem without having to create a minimum wage law. So what you really wanted is you wanted wage to go up. So that's what we really wanted. Now you can put a price floor, but you're going to have a side effect of a surplus of labor, aka unemployment. Another solution, and again you got to go back to previous chapters where you now explain how to shift supply and demand. But another solution is to try to figure out how to shift supply to the left. If you shift supply to the left, wages will go up by themselves, because equilibrium will make wages go up by itself as supply shifts to the left. All right, another thing you could do is you could try to figure out how to make demand shift to the right. So figure out a way to encourage more small businesses, or maybe teach those workers how to become entrepreneurs. So establish a program in your local college to create more entrepreneurs so that everybody can create more businesses. All right, so make demand shift to the right. All right, let's try to illustrate why is this ceilings and floors bad for economic activity. Now, to understand that, we need to introduce you to the question of consumer surplus and producer surplus. So let's talk about consumer and producer surplus. Right, so now we're in equilibrium here. All right, so what exactly is consumer surplus? Right, now, when you're studying supply and demand, one of the things that usually you start with is what exactly is somebody on the demand line. So an individual who say here on the demand line is a person that is willing and able to pay this price for the product. An individual who's here on the demand line is somebody who's willing and able to pay this price for the product. And an individual who's here on the demand line is somebody who's willing to pay this price for the product. If you ever wonder, by the way, how much you're willing to pay for a product, think about what they're actually selling it to you at. And then keep adding dollars or pennies to it. And then the moment you say no, that's where you are on the demand line. If you say no at a penny higher, then basically you're here on the demand line. But if you say no at say $10 higher than you're here, you say no at $100 higher than you're here. Okay? So pick any product, and if somebody says, let's say the product is $1,000, and somebody says $1,001, if you still say yes to $1,001, then you're moving yourself up on the demand line, basically. That's what's happening. All right, so in any case, somebody who's way up here on the demand line is somebody who really loves this product, and they're willing to pay a heck of a lot more than they're actually paying. Now, because we're using this model and prices are one price, then you're paying equilibrium, but you're actually happy by at least the difference between what equilibrium is and what this price is. The same can be said for pretty much anyone on the demand line. So when you put each individual person on the demand line and you trace all the way down how much they're happy by compared to what they're really paying, all of that area is what we call consumer surplus. All right. Something very similar can be said about the companies. So if you're a company here, what that basically means is that you can actually sell the product for this price, but because the market is selling it at equilibrium, you're happy by the difference. You could think of that as like being profit. If you're a company here on the supply line, then what that basically means you can actually sell it for this price, because that's your cost, but you actually sell it for this price, because that's equilibrium. So you're happy by the difference. If we take every company on the supply line and we do the same thing, we look at the difference between these two, then all of that area is what we call producer surplus. Now, assuming there is nothing else happening here, like government intervention or things of that sort, then economic surplus, and economic surplus is basically the happiness of all of society, producer and consumer, is equal to producer surplus plus consumer surplus. So the happiness of all of society is the addition of consumer surplus and producer surplus. All right. Now let's talk about what happens if I put a price ceiling or a price floor. All right. So these are equilibrium. Let's talk about what happens if I decide to put a price ceiling. Let's start with a ceiling. All right, so again, with the price ceiling, this becomes our price in the market. Now, to understand what happens, let's try to analyze how the market will look before the ceiling and after the ceiling. So let's look at our before the ceiling consumer surplus and producer surplus, and after the ceiling consumer surplus, producer surplus, and something we call deadweight loss. All right. Now, these particular areas, what we're going to do here is we're going to take a look at these areas that are formed, and we're going to assign them letters. All right, we're going to focus again on these areas here where consumer plus surplus was and where producer surplus was before. So let's call this whole area here A. Let's call this square here B, sorry, rectangle. Let's call this area here C. Let's call this area here E. And let's call this area here F. If you're thinking I'm discriminating against D, by the way, the reason we don't use this is because I don't want you to get confused with this D right here. All right, so in any case, now let's take a look at the areas that were consumer surplus before we established the ceiling. Now, before we established the ceiling, consumer surplus was basically this whole triangle here in blue. So we're going to use letters A and E for before the ceiling. A plus E. That was our consumer surplus. Our producer surplus was the area right below that. This right here. So our producer surplus before the ceiling is C, V, and F. All right, but when you pass the ceiling, one of the things that happened that we talked about is the fact that the quantity supply is no longer up here. So this used to be our previous quantity supply equals quantity demanded. That's what equilibrium is. But because we cut the price down to a lower level, then our quantity supply has now declined to that number. That basically means that anything beyond this line is simply not being produced. So it's gone compared to before. That's what we call deadweight loss, ENF. Now, ENF is a loss of economic efficiency. In this case, a physical production decline, because we're no longer producing that much. So that's what we call in this case deadweight loss, E and F. All right, consumer surplus is now different compared to before because the price is now lower. And if we follow the same definition we had before, the consumer surplus is anywhere from the point that you want in the demand line down to whatever price you're paying for the product. So now, if you were here, the price that you're paying for the product is all the way down here. And that's also true for pretty much everybody else along this portion of the demand line that's still being satisfied. So your consumer surplus is A and B. And that is after you impose the ceiling. Now notice that the producer is the one that's not going to be happy when you put a ceiling. And the reason they're not going to be happy is because this is all they got left. Now remember, the producer is not only just the person that makes the money. So we're not just talking about, say, the fat boss or the business owner. We're also talking about all the people that work in that business. And of course, if there's a lower price for the product, that also means that they're going to have to get paid less, because wages are a cost of production. All right, so notice that now after the ceiling, the producer surplus is only C. All right, let's talk about two things. One is, why would anybody want to put a ceiling if we know that it does this to economic efficiency? Well, one of the reasons you want to put it is because it makes somebody happy. Notice that the consumer might actually be happier compared to before, because E is what the consumer lost, if you look at the letter up here, but they gain B. So the consumer went from having E to having B instead of E. As long as the area of B is greater than the area of E, then the consumer is going to be happier after you pass the C. Now the producer is going to be unhappy regardless, because they lost B, but they also lost F. All right, so notice that in here we have a transfer of letter B from producer surplus to consumer surplus. And letter B is the one that makes all the difference for what we're trying to do here, because that is, as you can see, a pretty large area. So as long as B is greater than E, the consumer is going to feel better about this, but the producer is going to feel bad about it regardless, because they lost B and F. So in other words, ceilings and floors are usually used to make consumers happy, and a lot of the times they're used by politicians, not really by economists, unless there are particular situations where this seems like a good idea. All right, let's talk about a price floor now. All right, so here we are again, starting at equilibrium. All right, so let's establish our price floor. All right, now again, to try to understand the price floor, let's talk about farm products. Actually, farm commodities. All right. So when you establish a price floor, what you're basically doing is you're creating a price higher than equilibrium Okay, now notice that this price higher than equilibrium again is going to generate all these areas. And these are the areas that we want to talk about. So we have, let's call this area A, let's call this area B, call this area C, call this area E, let's call this area F. Alright, so before the floor was established, our consumer surplus was equal to area A plus B plus E, while our producer surplus was area C plus F. Alright, so consumer surplus was A, B, and E, this big triangle, and producer surplus was area C and F. Anything higher than supply all the way up to equilibrium, right here. Alright, again, that's before we put the floor. Now after we put the floor, this changes. So after the price floor, consumer surplus is now equal to, remember that consumer surplus is any area below the demand down to the price level that you're going to pay. In this case, the price level has gone higher. So now the consumer is going to be less happy. So consumer only gets to keep A compared to before. Producer surplus is going to be equal to areas C and B. And areas E and F go to deadweight loss. Alright, now let's talk a little bit more about these areas E and F. Notice that when you establish a floor, the quantity demanded is going to decline. Quantity demanded declines to this amount, but the quantity supply increases. All right, now if you just talk about the local market, aka the one that you're in right now, then it doesn't make any sense to use any area beyond that, because the local market only buys whatever the local market wants, which in this case, this is the quantity demanded, and anything beyond here, the local market is not going to buy. Now you might produce it. In other words, you might decide to produce it all the way to QS, but you're just going to have to throw it away. because all of that stuff is going to be a surplus. You overproduce compared to what the market is asking you to sell. Now, what if we do use that though, that overproduction? Now, there are two things that you could do with that overproduction. The first thing you could do is you could just open the market for international trade. You have a surplus. The quantity supply is greater than the quantity demanded. And one of the things that you could do is you could take that surplus that you have, and remember the way you calculate a surplus is by doing quantity supply minus quantity demanded. So it will give you basically the difference between this number and this number. That will be your surplus size. So you can take that surplus and export it. That's one thing you could do. And then try to compete on international markets to sell it. The second thing you could do with those exports is the government can buy it. Now, why would the government want to buy export products? Surplus products. Well, multiple reasons. For emergency purposes, for example, we gotta have a stockpile of stuff out there. In the recent pandemic in the US in 2020, believe it or not, we have lots and lots of stuff stored at the federal government level for multiple types of pandemics. Not as much stuff for the individual type of pandemic we had right now, but there was plenty of stuff stored, and that's what the government is accessing right away. That's what's being distributed and moved all over the country. All right, now the second thing again you could do here is the government can buy the extra stuff that you're producing. So the government can purchase it. If the government decides to purchase it, then the revenue for the producer is going to change, and that's going to make the producer happier compared to before. It's going to add all of this area you see here as extra producer surplus. All right. Now, what will be the total revenue of the producer if the government decides to buy their product? Well, the first revenue for the producer is going to come from the people who buy it in the local market, and that will be price M times QD. So anything in here so when you take price M, multiply it times QD, it generates this rectangle. So that rectangle will be the revenue that the producer generates by selling to the local market. This portion here. But the producer is also selling the next portion, the difference between QS and QD, to the government. So if they sell that to the government, then the revenue to the producer is going to be also price M times QS minus QD. In other words, the price in the market times the difference between QS and QD, or this rectangle over here. All right, if you're from the United States, or maybe from a lot of other different countries, because the US is not the only one that does this, but the US has a lot of very nice farm subsidies. And the way the majority of farm subsidies work is exactly what you see right here. The government creates a price in the market where they say, okay, look, we'll buy your product at this price, regardless of what you can sell it at or how the market is. So in other words, as long as you have product to sell, we will buy it at this price. So what that basically means is it sort of creates a bit of a baseline for what the price of a product is. Because why would they want to sell it at any lower than that to anybody when they know they can sell it to the government at that price? So that creates a sort of floor. Then after that, you can sell it to the local market for anything higher than that. And whatever's left over, you sell it to the government. The reason we pass a lot of these farm subsidies is because we want to make sure that farmers don't go away and lose to competition from other countries that can create farming products cheaper than we do. So in a lot of countries, they create these sort of structures to protect farmers and their livelihood so that they stay in the individual country where they are. Okay, so again, hopefully you understand a little bit more about price floors now. Just continuing to finish up some of the points on the PowerPoint. The deadweight loss is basically a reduction in economic surplus resulting from the market not being in equilibrium. And the only way the market is efficient is if you stay at the equilibrium level, so there is no deadweight loss. I hope you kind of picked that up as we were going over this example. In other words, being at equilibrium does not generate a deadweight loss, therefore it is the best place to be. Being at equilibrium does not generate a deadweight loss. So economic surplus is maximized if you stay at equilibrium. If you do not stay at equilibrium, there's always some kind of deadweight loss. So there's always some kind of deadweight loss generated if you don't stay at equilibrium. Also remember here, where we talked about this extra portion for the farmers, I need you to understand that the government buys this, but the way the government makes money is through taxes. So in order to pay for that revenue, the government has to increase the level of taxes. All right, so the only efficient outcome in a market is to basically allow the market to set its own price. So no government intervention. Any sort of government price control will result in a surplus, transfer money from either consumers to producers or producers to consumers. Notice that in the second case, where we were doing the price floor, there was a transfer as well of letter B from the consumer to the producer. And again, that was without assuming that the government buys all the extra stuff. So it's just the fact that we put a floor in the market. All right. The last example I like to cover in this particular chapter is taxes. And hopefully this example will help you understand why nobody likes taxes. When you put a ceiling or a floor, somebody wins. So if I put ceilings, consumers win. If I put floors, producers win. But if I put taxes, nobody wins. And therefore, nobody likes them, except the government. Because most people don't quite understand what the government does with their money. Then they sort of don't like it. All right, so let's talk about taxes. So here we have our supply line, let's call it supply 1. Here we have our demand line, let's call it demand 1. And here we have our equilibrium. Q1, P1. All right, now to be more specific, let's do a very specific example. So let's say this is a market for cigarettes. Here we go. All right, so let's say this is a market for cigarettes. And let's say the government wants to discourage people from smoking. So the government decides to put a tax of $1 in cigarette packs. So every time you buy a pack of smokes, you got to pay an extra $1. All right, so how would that show on our supply and demand model? Because it's obviously a government intervention. All right, now the way we put taxes on supply and demand, especially in this case sales taxes, not income taxes. Income tax will be on the demand line. Sales taxes are collected on the sales floor. So it's basically an increase in the cost of production, or that's how we show it here. So the supply line will change So the supply line will move up or cost more by $1. So the supply line will shift to the left and the movement up here will be $1. So the vertical difference all along supply 1 and supply 2 will be the size of the tax, the $1. Okay, so the vertical difference between supply 1 and supply 2 will be the $1 tax. Now prices, remember, are not determined by neither supply or demand alone. Equilibrium prices are determined by supply and demand. So equilibrium prices will be determined by the movement in equilibrium. And in this case, you go from equilibrium 1 to equilibrium 2. All right, that creates all these, again, interesting areas that we now need to analyze. So we use this area, let's call it A. This area here, let's call it B. Actually, let me delineate this a little bit more. So we're going to call area A this area here. We're going to call area B this area here. We're going to call area C this rectangle here. We're going to call area E this triangle here. And we're going to call this area here F. This little rectangle, little triangle there. And this area G. This little rectangle there. Sorry, triangle. All right. So remember, in this case, we're paying equilibrium price. So price 2, it's still an equilibrium price, but it is now higher than before. As we were saying, the $1 tax, it's the vertical difference between any point on the supply 1 and any point on the supply 2. So to understand a little bit about why taxes sometimes don't generate an equal amount in the price, look at the difference between the vertical movement here. So this is the vertical difference between supply 1 and supply 2 at the new equilibrium point. The new equilibrium point is where Q2 is going to be. So we're going to go from producing Q1 to producing Q2. and equilibrium quantity is going to decline. The $1 tax is going to be the difference, again, the vertical difference between supply 1 and supply 2. So if we're at quantity 2, the $1 difference shows up as the difference between this point and this point, and that's where the $1 is going to be. All right, so this point down here represents our cost of production at Q2, while this point represents our price at P2. So before, if P1 was, say, $5, then the new price of cigarettes, it's not going to be $1 higher, because notice that $1 higher will be more than the change that you see here. So it will, the new price of cigarettes will be something like, I don't know, $5 and say 60 cents. The $1 is going to show up between this price and this cost. So the cost of production at the second point is going to be $4.60. All right, now how much the price goes up, by the way, depends on the elasticity of supply and demand. So how much can the producer transfer to the consumer in price changes? The more inelastic the demand line is, then the more the producer is going to be able to transfer to the consumer in this price change. So in other words, the more this number will go up compared to this 5 where you started at. All right, now let's talk about why this is bad and who ends up with the money. So let's talk about who had it before. So before the tax, consumer surplus was equal to A plus B plus F. And producer surplus was equal to C plus G plus E. So again, nothing new here. Before the tax, the big triangle, A, B, and F, were consumer surplus. Big triangle down here, ECG or CGE, was our producer surplus. All right. Now, after you pass the tax, consumer surplus is equal to, and again, this is using the same definition we had before, is equal to the distance between the demand line down to the price level you're going to pay. In this case, the price level you're going to pay is P2. So it's this area A. That's our consumer surplus after you pass the ceiling. Producer surplus is going to be equal to the amount of money between the supply line up to the price level. But remember that now there is a tax. The tax is something that's collected at the register, but it will be transferred to the government by that producer. So the tax is B and C. All right, now why would the tax be B and C? Well, the tax is B and C because we pass a $1 tax for every cigarette pack that you sell. And a $1 tax per pack is this $1 here, or the vertical difference between the previous supply and the new. So that $1 is a tax, times Q2, which is the amount of cigarette packs that you're selling. So it's P2, the difference between P2 and cost, which is this rectangle, times Q2. So B and C become government revenue. What that means is that they're no longer part of producer surplus. Producer surplus is now only E. Not only that, when you pass a tax, you still have a deadweight loss. In this case, deadweight loss is equal to F plus G. All right. B is what we call the tax incidence to the consumer. So B is what we call the consumer tax incidence. In other words, the portion of the tax is being paid by the consumer. And then C is what we call the producer tax incidence. So this is a portion that the producer is going to pay out of their previous economic efficiency or economic surplus. Okay? The B and the C represent the tax incidence to society that is now being transferred to the government. And notice that this is the reason why nobody likes taxes. All the money is being transferred to the government. So letters C and letter B came from the producer and the consumer, and they're being transferred to the government. F and G were lost to deadweight loss, which is again a loss of economic efficiency. And the only thing that society is left with is A and E. And that's the reason why very few people like taxes. All right. Now, before I move on, and just so that maybe if anybody's ever interested about learning a little bit more about this, let's talk about the incidence amount and the difference in incidence depending on whether you are inelastic or elastic. So let's use, for example, this particular demand versus this particular demand compared to this supply line. All right, so we'll call this demand 1, this demand 2, and this P1. Sorry, supply 1. All right, so now let me shift that supply to the left again. So we pass the tax, and again supply shifts to the left. All right, now let's look at the differences only on this portion here. So this is what I'm interested on, this area B here. Okay, so when this price changes up, that area B that's generated. Okay, so if we're down here on this demand line, we're going to travel all the way up here and look at the size of that B. Okay, this whole area here is that B at D2. All right, now let's do it on this side, but again the line is less steep. So we go from this point, travel up here, so this is our incidence. So notice the shape of this B. Okay, now this is a B if it was using this demand line. Now let's compare that to what would happen to the producer. So notice that in this case at D2, the producer is unhappy by this portion here. So that C is a smaller portion compared to that B. So if we were on demand 2, which is more inelastic, then the incidence to the consumer is greater than the incidence to the producer. If instead the demand is more elastic, notice that the incidence to the consumer and the incidence to the producer are about the same. So in other words, it's B2 and this C2, which is all this green area here, is basically very similar. So using demand 1, which is not as inelastic, let's call it relatively elastic. So being relatively elastic means that B, sorry, I should have called this one, that B1 is pretty similar to that C1. So the incidence to the consumer and the producer are about the same, but if you have a highly inelastic demand line, the incidence to the consumer is more than the incidence to the producer. And again, what we're doing is just comparing the difference between this huge rectangle to this C2 rectangle. So the shape of the demand line, whether it's elastic or inelastic, changes who gets hurt more or who has more incidence on a change in the price. All right, so anyway, I hope this helped you understand a little bit about ceilings, floors, and taxes and consumer and producer surplus. So this was Professor Choi in another chapter about, in this case, economic efficiency, price setting, and taxation. Have a good one.